when you look back in 10, 20, 50 years, what is the body of work that you would want to have put out there and, essentially be remembered for? And that's the tagline of this podcast, the Body of Work podcast, or for short, the BOWpod or the BOWpod. It doesn't really matter. But this tagline is essentially, meant to serve as a reminder and an inspiration for myself and for anyone that, comes across and listens to this podcast that, keeping that time frame in perspective, that time frame of 10, 20, be it 50 years, to think long term and not focus and dial in too much on, like the short term results or, try to have things done quickly. Because as we all know, or I mean, as I've experienced, let me put it that way, it never tends to end up play out in a positive way, when you just focus on short-term results. I just want to give a side note that I do have some notes sitting right here in front of me. This is the first episode, so I just wanted to make sure I get, have my thoughts gathered and just be able to communicate what I wanted to communicate within this first episode. I put here that a huge milestone of mine, and this is like, like thinking big for the podcast, but a huge milestone of mine is to have, Gary Vee, Chris Do, and Dan Koe on this podcast. Now, I don't know if these names ring a bell to any of you. If they don't, I mean, I'll probably touch base on them in future episode. But these are some guys that have, essentially inspired me to, just to take steps within, this whole new space, this digital space, this creator economy space. This creator economy space. And I know it may sound a bit weird, but they kind of almost, I would say, like gave me permission to just put myself out there and just, just be me unapologetically, stop worrying too much about what others are going to say about you, or in terms of like your shortcomings, like maybe some skill sets that you don't that I didn't possess, that it is possible to just gain those skill sets and make a living off of it. Now, I don't want to make this one too long because I just want to be straight to the point. So very quickly, who am I and, what is the whole, like, what can you expect from the BOWpod, the Body of Work podcast? And very short, I'm 35. I'm a family man. I have 2 kids, a wife. I live here in the Netherlands, in Groningen up north, in the Netherlands. And we're now in November filming this. As of July or past July is when I quit my 9 to 5 to pursue the entrepreneurial path. Crazy. No necessary, no real plan B, A, or whatever you want to call it. But it just felt like time for me to take the next step in, like in this chapter called, life. And so here I am starting this podcast. And yeah, this podcast, the Body of Work podcast, just to be like, so what can you expect from it? It's essentially me documenting my journey now, having quit my job and on this entrepreneurial path and seeing, where it takes me. And this comes off of the back of Gary Vee's ethos, which really strongly inspired me to even consider about thinking about starting a podcast. And that ethos being, document, don't create. I'm going to say it again, document, don't create, because this is essentially a tagline, another tagline, quote, whatever you want to call it, that I feel has strongly pushed me and propelled me to make steps like this and just document the process. And, just before starting this podcast, it's been a couple of weeks since I've been like, really hard on putting out content online, given the different activities that I'm doing. And some of those main things that I'm embarking upon, aside from this podcast now, is starting a web design business or further building a web design business where essentially I help business owners um, kind of like identify problems in their business and finding solutions that will help them gain more clients, more customers, and essentially, drive more revenue to their business. And then aside from that, like I said, I'm 35. And one thing that I find super important, especially having a family, is being fit. And being a fit, young man above the age of 35, it can come with its challenges, being a family man and having, different priorities. But it is something, being fit and active is something that I've always find important. And I just wanted to kind of share that journey as well as I, continue to stay, do my best to stay in shape. Um, yeah. And another driver again, for this podcast, and this is being upfront or whatever. But I really want to use this podcast as a way to film longer form content and um kind of as a use this as a way to in a longer form, like just document, my ideas, my beliefs, my values, my stories, rants, basically everything on my journey up to this point. I want to share and just document. And from this point onward, I want to literally like document as much as possible all of my truths, just so that again, with that mindset of looking back in 10, 20, 50 years, looking back and seeing, this is what was going on in my head. This is basically how things started. And again, I don't know where I'm going to be, in 50 years. But, starting this podcast and being on this journey, like, I am super, super excited and stoked to see like, what will transpire. Um, the format of this podcast, like, I'm not fully sure yet how it's going to be. It's going to be essentially, me sharing my ideas, stories, etc. On this journey. But I do, um, maybe later on want to invite, a guest here and there to just talk about them and, just really like get into the nitty gritty immediately, finding out, what is the body of work that they're trying to put out and be remembered for. I want to side note this by saying this podcast is going to be, at least the longer form version, is going to be as raw and uncut as possible. So, um, all of my, like when I'm talking, the likes, like what we call filler words, I'm very much likely not gonna edit these things out, just because I don't want this podcast to come across as me looking to be perfect or chasing perfectionism, like trying to have like the best podcast out there. Like that's totally not the case. I actually want to come from a perspective where I'm just being as authentic as possible and genuine. And, for the simple fact that, again, in like 10, 20 years, you know, there might be another young man who, is around my age, 35 years old and maybe wanting to do something similar and probably like just struggling, with the idea of, like I need to sound perfect. I need to be able to articulate my ideas like flawlessly, not speak with any ums or, like pauses, and even, at times, like maybe even lose my train of thought. And that may even mean having a big pause, from every now and again. But I just wanna have this here just to serve as an example that it shouldn't limit you. These things shouldn't stop you. And you should just go out and, like pursue and just like take action on the things that you want to take action on. Um, and so essentially, this will be a longer format of the podcast, where I'm most likely, at least, and I'm going to just share my ideas. So my idea is to actually like post it up on YouTube and then, as a long form piece, and then also maybe take the audio, pull it on and see if I can put it on Spotify or Apple Music. I'm not sure yet what that process looks like or how I'm even going to go about that. which is actually like the beauty in this whole on this whole journey, because this is me being an example for myself and showing myself that I can have an idea and I can execute on an idea as long as it's on, on path where I want to go to, and, not fall into that trap of overthinking or trying to research everything down to the T, before you get started. It's like literally, get started, start ugly, start raw, and just figure shit out along the way. So yeah, so, like have those long pieces of content out, and then also probably like transcribing the video. And then I also picked up writing at the beginning of this year. And that's where, Dan Koe came in. I'm not a writer, by any means, but I do enjoy that process of researching and just putting, writing your ideas down in a very engaging and um, authentic way. That's the best word I can find right now. And just share that with people, as a way to provide value to them. So that's kind of what I'm looking at doing. And then from those longer form pieces, like the YouTube, I'm probably going to cut it out into bite-sized pieces and post on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, as a way just to, like drive traffic back to this longer piece of content, which I feel where people would get, I mean, if you do come back, but where you would get the most value from. So that's basically it. Like, I'm not going to make it any longer, not going to go on any further. But this is episode 1 of the BOWpod, guys. Like, if you actually watch up until this point, I appreciate you. Like, from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you. And I'm happy to take you along on this journey. And again, this is just the starting. And, just for myself, for my future self, when you look back at this, I just want you to, be proud of where you started and then where you are at that point. So again, this is episode 1 of the BOWpod. We're going to wrap things up here, and I hope to catch you back on the next episode. Peace.